Well, I hope you're not looking at British patriots to be doing that, Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, why not use some of those illegals you've been bringing over and putting in hotels? I hear some of them are pretty handy with a knife.
When it comes to Keir Starmer suggesting that British young men, and maybe some women too, should be in Ukraine, that we should have British boots on the ground, I say no, no, no. And actually, I now look at this man and see the most dangerous Prime Minister since Neville Chamberlain, which is a big thing to say, given that we're obviously dealing with the heir to Tony Blair as well. Huge reaction to this interview in the Daily Telegraph, or column, this written column where Starmer made this proposal overnight. From Katie Hopkins: Dear Keir Starmer, twat spangle, you want boots on the ground in Ukraine? Feel free to conscript every single illegal you've been flesh trading in the UK for pounds. They are well fed in fancy hotels and pretty handy with knives. Leave our British lads alone. And watch what she had to say about that.
First up, Trump tried to seek a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia by speaking to the adults in the room, namely Putin. Of course, Zelensky doesn't want peace because his Black Rock masters want him to keep pushing to join NATO, because then they can keep laundering the money. So now Keir Starmer says he's going to put boots on the ground over in Ukraine. Well, I hope you're not looking at British patriots to be doing that, Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, why not use some of those illegals you've been bringing over and putting in hotels? I hear some of them are pretty handy with a knife. In other news, J.D. Vance turns up at the Munich Security Conference and tells them there's no such thing as democracy in Western Europe, there's no freedom of speech in Western Europe, there's no rule of law. So the chairman stood up and started crying because J.D. Vance was mean and said hurty words. Herr Flick from Germany was really pissed off. But of course, we've just cancelled the Romanian elections. They've cancelled local elections in the UK. You can be arrested for a Facebook post over in Germany. And Tommy Robinson is still in solitary confinement. So they don't really have much of an argument.
No, they don't. They don't. I mean, democracy is dying. But in terms of the troops that Starmer wants to deploy, here's exactly what he said. The UK is ready to play a leading role in accelerating the work on security guarantees for Ukraine. This includes further support for Ukraine's military, where the UK has already committed £3 billion a year until at least 2030. But it also means being ready and willing to contribute to security guarantees to Ukraine by putting our own troops on the ground if necessary. Starmer said, I do not say that lightly. I feel very deeply the responsibility that comes with potentially putting British servicemen and women in harm's way. But any role in helping to guarantee Ukraine's security is helping to guarantee the security of our continent and the security of this country. The end of this war, when it comes, cannot merely become a temporary pause before Putin's attacks again. Well, I'm sorry, Alex Phillips. I have my head in my hands because, number one, I do not trust this man at all. I find it astonishing that we are in economic dire straits. We cannot even protect ourselves, yet he's boasting about having committed £3 billion a year until at least 2030. But the prospect of Starmer sending young British men to Ukraine makes me sick. Am I wrong?
It's actually very nuanced. And look, I think we've got to take that particular exclusive written piece in the Telegraph by Sir Keir Starmer as two things. One is self-aggrandizement. It's written in the Telegraph. It's for an audience. It's to try and show a little bit of leg to the right wing or even centrist people who fundamentally despise him. It's to try and show courage and sound like a wartime leader, because that's what all failing prime ministers have always tried to do. It's also trying to show a little bit of ankle to America before he goes on his Washington visit. So in those respects, so I think I just pinged on my laptop. Apologies for that noise. In that respect, I think we've got to look at it for what it is, which is a propaganda exercise. What I find incredulous about this situation is we know that Putin and Trump are sitting down together in Saudi Arabia. Well, not Putin, actually. It isn't him. It's Marco Rubio sitting down with Sergei Lavrov and are kicking off conversations. And everyone I've spoken to, who I think is of great credibility, have said this can't be a bad thing. We all want there to be peace in Ukraine. We don't know what the details of that are going to be. It's my understanding as well that Zelensky will be going on Wednesday to Saudi Arabia to throw in his two bits. Again, we're getting a process moving. So for Keir Starmer to jump out of the box and say, we're going to send troops when no one knows to what and for what and what the conditions are and what the deal is just totally madness. You know, committing our soldiers to a foreign land is utterly insane, considering especially as he was of the be careful brigade, don't do this and back Putin in a corner, he might use nuclear weapons, given that Russian bears are buzzing Lincolnshire coastlines and Norfolk coastlines, and Russian subs are prowling through the channel, and their Russian agents, the FSB, are setting on fire weapons makers in the UK. I mean, they use a whole load of different forms of warfare, so we're potentially inviting some form of retaliation. It seems to me not thought through. What I would say is this, because we don't know what that deal is, because we don't know what it's going to look like, because we don't know what we're entering into, is way too premature to say whether or not we want to be part of it, and committing troops is a good idea. Number one, we've got about 70,000 people in our armed forces at the moment. Compare that to the 1980s, it was 120,000. They're under-resourced. The 2.5 spending commitment, 2.5% of GDP spending commitment on our military is not even going to touch the sides. And even now, we don't have a pathway financially of saying how we're going to get to the 2.5%. So again, are we even able to do this? Now, all of those questions need to be answered before I can give a verdict on whether this is going to be right or wrong, because I also want to make clear that Putin is a monster and a menace, and he will come back for more. There was appeasement in 2014 when the Western world allowed him to seize Crimea. He wants to seize that black coast of Ukraine in order to be able to control maritime routes, to war game the supply of food, of wheat, of oil, of fertilizer to the entire world to trigger global inflation. We know that that is on the Russian agenda. They've already tried practicing this. And so at the same time, you've got Keir Starmer trying to essentially cut off farming in the UK, instead giving money to foreign farmers. And then, is that, you know, the result of this might be we're in a World War II situation where 60% of our
but the
food...
whole idea that we can even just say, Alex, it was a good thing to do. Now, I don't think it is, but just say it was. Actually, our army is disintegrating. I mean, look at what Dana was saying over the weekend. Our army is disintegrating to such an extent that we can't even protect ourselves. And the idea that we can afford £3 billion a year just financially to Ukraine. No, we've got to build up our own defense. The reason you're watching this show is because you know that these days, and we've been discussing it lots at the moment, it's impossible to trust the mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to patrol social media. And that's for a very good reason, given the Brexit debate, COVID debacle, and demonisation of Donald Trump. But I've got the solution for you. Today's sponsor, Ground News, created by a former NASA engineer to provide you with the only safe way to consume the headlines, is going to solve so many of these issues. Go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out for yourself, by the way. But I want to show you this incredible website and app in action. So let's take the recent story. We've discussed it lots of Outspoken of Elon Musk's fallout with Nigel Farage over Tommy Robinson, which the left-wing legacy media tried to whip up to destroy all three men, actually. And by looking at Ground News, you can see very clearly that it's collated the 230 sources on this story in one place. But what Ground News instantly shows is how the story is being covered by the media and broken down by whether those media organizations lean to the left or right, illustrated by its biased distribution service, which features on all stories. Then you can scroll down and actually see every article about the topic broken down by the political position or ownership of the publication. So in this case, it shows quite clearly that Fox News gave a fair analysis compared to Mediaite and The Independent, which did not, lambasting the men as morons with big egos without actually looking into why this split happened and how it can be resolved. What's more, Ground News gets to know you personally, providing you with the news stories you're interested in, while also analysing your own biases and coming up with potential blind spots you might not be hearing about because of your media consumption. And look, I know you love the news, that's why you're watching Outspoken, but you don't trust the legacy media. But what Ground News does is give you the tools to understand the truth about what is going on in the world. It is the only way I read the news now, allowing you to see through media bias and manipulative narratives with no more relying on the MSM to define what's really going on for you. So go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out. You can subscribe through my link today for 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use for unlimited access. And I should say, by the way, Ground News is a really great organization. It is subscriber funded, and by supporting my sponsors like Ground News, you also support my work too. And for less than a Netflix subscription, you can get all the world's news in one place and think for yourself. It really has been a game changer for a news junkie like me. So let me just repeat the address. It is linked in the show notes below, or you can click on the QR code if you're watching on screen. But the address, ground.news/outspoken. But now, back to the show. Zia Youssef, the Reform UK chairman, he had an interesting take on this. He clearly believes that Starmer is doing this for political reasons, which I think is really disturbing if true. And I actually agree with what Zia Youssef is saying here. He posted on X, has anyone else noticed that political leaders start to get really keen to send other people's children to war zones after their domestic poll ratings collapse? Yeah. Now, Alex, that is chilling. When you think about it, I think he's right, but it's a chilling thought.
Boris Johnson did the same. He loved playing the big I am, and I'm going to go and save Ukraine. I'm here. I'm flying over to Kiev. And look, they do use this for propaganda purposes. We know that, and I think that's a very sane argument to make. I do want to give a bit of a counterpoint, okay? And like I said, I say everything with pragmatism, because I would be an idiot to play armchair general and to say I understand the entire situation. All the points being made about the diminished armed forces are very real. We actually, do we have the capabilities to go in and patrol a demilitarized zone? I don't know, probably not. But then, sometimes cynically, you've got to look at the flip side to this. And actually, what we do know is our armed forces have been essentially flattered and not really being able to do much for the best part of a number of decades, as they've been diminished because the European leaders have got it into their heads that we actually live in perpetual peace times when the Cold War never finished. If we were to have some people stationed over in a demilitarized zone between Ukraine and Russia, and look, in an ideal world, I don't want Putin to get a single inch of territory in Ukraine. I do not. But we've got to be pragmatic about this. Were our armed forces to be a part of that operation, there could be some plus sides. So let me spell this out. And again, I'm just being pragmatic and putting in the counterpoint. The plus sides would be, in some respects, this war in Ukraine has been used to, as most wars are, to advance innovations. Ukraine has become the absolute masters at being able to re-engineer drones to do things that were never thought possible on the battlefield. This is an army that has been able so far, single-handedly, they've not been using North Koreans, just the odd weapon that Europe seems fit to give them. They have been able to hold back Russia. They've proven themselves to be extremely talented, extremely innovative, extremely capable, using all sorts of technologies that nobody else is using. And given that they were just caught by surprise when Putin had been arming themselves up for ages, to be able to hold back as they have done is incredible. And without being cynical, actually, if some of our armed forces were going to go and be trained up by the best of the best in Ukraine to patrol a demilitarized zone, it could actually help to grow our troops, to get that investment into defense that we're talking about, to get the latest technologies so many people from the defense sector are saying that we so desperately need. Do I think it's morally right? Do I think that it's practicable? Both of those are a massive grey area for me. But I would say this, there were similar conversations that happened in World War I, that happened in World War II, when these things were taking place on continental Europe, not on our little island. Did we send men to the Somme? Yes, we did. Did we go in and join Allied forces to hold back the Nazis? Yes, we did. And so do we want to be part of defending Europe again? I think that there's a strong argument to say, yes, that is a reasonable thing to say we should do. But the other question is, if you're treating your own people at home brutally, particularly the white working classes, if you're not funding them, if you're not giving money to defense, and if you're using the whole Ukraine thing as some sort of really cynical propaganda exercise, and then you expect people to go over and fight in a foreign land, don't be surprised when actually there's a lot of people saying, we don't fancy doing this. What I would say, great testaments to our armed forces. most of the men and women, I'd say by far the vast majority of men and women in the armed forces in this country are brilliant. They understand the difference between right and wrong. They want there to be a strong Europe. They want us to be strong. They want us to be capable. And so there'll be a whole number of them out there going, get us in there and we will protect Europe. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But when it comes to actually, showering praise on Sir Keir Starmer for popping this out in a Telegraph article, no, I don't think he does deserve the praise. But do I want to add a more nuanced counterpoint to the debate? Yeah, and that's all I'm doing.
No, and I understand that, but I guess from my point of view, this is a war that should have ended well over 2 years ago. The bloodshed, the destruction of Ukraine was completely avoidable. But Alex, look, I want to come to our friend Christoph Huesgen, the sort of chair of the Munich Security Conference, who was so upset, Alex, at JD Vance offering some home truths about the state of the United Kingdom in Europe. He actually broke down in tears on stage, I think illustrating exactly the problem that the American vice president was talking about. Your reaction after, Alex, but watch this first.
After the speech of Vice President Vance on Friday, we have to fear that our common value base is not that common anymore. I'm very grateful to all those European politicians that spoke out and reaffirmed the values and principles that they are defending. No one did this better than President Zelensky. Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult.
Alex, this is why Europe is in trouble.
Yeah, that is the personification actually of Europe, isn't it? I mean, let's talk a bit about Christoph Huesgen, I don't know how you say his name. He'll probably cry if I pronounce it wrong. He was the Undersecretary for European Foreign and Security Policy in the German Chancellery from 2005 to 2017. So a good long old time. He was described as Angela Merkel's most influential foreign policy and security advisor. Well, what decisions did Angela Merkel make during this time period? She decided they wanted to build Nord Stream 2 and actually get loads of gas from Putin because that's what they were going to live off, and at the same time decommission all of Germany's nuclear power plants. She also decided that the whole refugees welcome thing was a great way to treat people in Islamic countries where there were Islamist wars. Let them all come in here. They must all be good people. At the same time, of course, who happened to be the German defense minister from 2013 to 2019? Ursula von der Leyen, who goes down on record as being the person who decimated the German armed forces, who ransacked their arsenal. Germany put itself in a massive position of weakness, as did most of Europe. So when Putin strolled into Ukraine and said, I'm going to take this now, they took ages to react because they knew how intertwined their economy was. And so he might be crying. He might be crying because he's been found out. It was people like him who did this to the continent of Europe. It was people like him who appeased Putin. It was people like him who saw the complete destruction of our defensive capabilities across Europe. It's people like him who thought open borders was a wonderful, kind thing to do. JD Vance has just pointed at him and said, you have done this. And he's crying. And they're all clapping for him crying and coming up for a group hug. Pathetic. And this is what I'm talking about. This is the wake-up call that Europe needs. People like him need to be out of a job. They shouldn't be rewarded for their failure in all of those positions by then heading up the Munich Security Conference. You are the very definition of Christoph, whatever your name is, Huesgen, don't care. You are the definition of why Europe is insecure.
Amen. Amen to that. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.